January 25th, 1998. 26 divers descended into the Great Barrier Reef's crystal waters. Only 24 returned to shore. The others would leave behind nothing but scattered equipment and haunting questions that remain unanswered to this day. On a seemingly ordinary day in 1998, the crystalline waters off Port Douglas, Australia, held no hint of the nightmare about to unfold. This quiet coastal town, home to just over 3,000 souls, had always been a paradise for diving enthusiasts seeking the majesty of the Great Barrier Reef. Yet beneath its tranquil surface, a story was about to emerge that would send ripples through the diving community worldwide. Tom and Eileen Lonergan appeared to be just another couple seeking adventure among the coral gardens of the world's largest living structure. The Great Barrier Reef, stretching across an expanse visible from space, houses an underwater metropolis of 400 coral species and 1,500 different types of fish. Its beauty, however, masks an unforgiving wilderness where human error can exact the ultimate price. The tragic irony of their story lies not just in Tom's prophetic diary entry, but in the timing of their visit. They witnessed this marine wonder during its golden years before climate change and human activity would begin its relentless assault on the reef's delicate ecosystem. The coral bleaching that now threatens this natural wonder was then just a distant concern, but another, more immediate danger lurked in the seemingly perfect waters. The morning they boarded their diving vessel held no omens. The sun sparkled on the Pacific waters, tourists chatted excitedly about their upcoming adventure, and the dive operators went through their usual preparations. But within hours, an unprecedented situation would unfold, one that would expose critical flaws in diving safety protocols and force the entire industry to confront its deadliest assumptions. As we delve deeper into this true story, remember that sometimes reality crafts tales more chilling than any horror movie. The vast ocean holds secrets darker than any screenwriter could imagine, and the Lonergan story serves as a haunting reminder that paradise can transform into purgatory in the blink of an eye. Their experience would not only change diving safety forever, but would also force us to confront our own mortality in the face of nature's vast indifference. The quiet ripples off Port Douglas that morning held no warning of the storm about to break, no hint that this day would become a cautionary tale taught in diving schools across the globe. As the morning sun climbed higher, Tom and Eileen Lonergan prepared for what they thought would be just another dive in their logbook. They couldn't have known they were about to become the center of one of Australia's most perplexing maritime mysteries. Far beneath their own love story lay a darker undercurrent, one that would make their final adventure together hauntingly poetic. Tom and Eileen Lonergan's romance had blossomed in the halls of Louisiana State University, where they discovered not just each other, but a shared dream of touching lives across the world. He was 33, she was 28, and their bond was so intense it became the stuff of gentle ribbing among friends who secretly yearned for such a connection. Their decade-long marriage had taken them far from their Louisiana roots through the Peace Corps, where they found purpose teaching underprivileged children in Fiji. The couple had navigated the smallest Pacific islands together, their shared passion for adventure matched only by their desire to make a difference. By 1998, having completed their mission, they chose one final grand gesture before returning home: a round-the-world journey to witness Earth's most spectacular sights. Diving had become their shared language of love, a passion Eileen had introduced to Tom during their college years. It seemed fitting that the Great Barrier Reef would be their final adventure together, though neither could have known just how final it would be. That fateful Sunday, January 25, 1998, dawned with deceptive beauty over Port Douglas. The morning sun painted promises of another perfect day as they boarded the Outer Edge, a modest 26-seat vessel bound for the reef. There was something bittersweet about that morning, the knowledge that this would be their last great adventure before returning to American soil in March. The couple had spent their years together chasing natural wonders, camping under stars, and swimming in open waters. Their love story had been written across continents, through service to others, and in the depths of countless dives. As the outer edge cut through the crystal waters toward the reef, Tom and Eileen sat close together, their diving gear ready, their excitement palpable. They had no way of knowing that their profound connection, the very thing their friends had envied, would soon be tested in ways no romance should endure. The vast expanse of the Pacific stretched before them, holding secrets that would transform their final adventure into something far more profound than a simple day trip to the reef. The boat's wake carved white lines through the turquoise sea, each ripple taking them closer to a destiny neither had imagined when planning their farewell tour of paradise. Their story was about to become more than just another tale of young love and adventure. It would soon serve as a grim reminder of how quickly paradise can transform into purgatory, how the sea's beauty can mask its ultimate indifference to human life. The outer edge sliced through waves carrying its cargo of dreams and oxygen tanks, each passenger paying 160 Australian dollars for what promised to be an unforgettable experience. Among the diverse group of divers, Tom and Eileen stood out for their quiet confidence, declining the offered instructor. Their years of shared experience had bred the kind of trust that sometimes precedes tragedy. At 3 p.m., as the tropical sun hung high over the Pacific, the final dive of the day began. The familiar ritual played out, divers in their neoprene armor tipping backward into the embrace of the ocean, disappearing beneath the surface into their own private underwater paradise. Some hovered near the surface, while others plunged deeper, exploring the reef's secrets at depths between 30 and 90 feet. The ocean, deceptively peaceful, kept its darker intentions hidden. The rules of diving are written in the ink of past tragedies. Never dive alone. Ascend slowly, following the languid pace of your own bubbles. The ocean's pressure is an unseen force that can turn human blood into a deadly cocktail of gas bubbles if these rules are ignored. Decompression sickness, the silent killer of the deep, lurks in every too rapid ascent, waiting to claim those who rush their return to the surface. The diving companies of Port Douglas had built their reputations on years of safely guiding tourists through these waters. They knew every coral head, every current, every potential hazard lurking in the seemingly tranquil waters. But the ocean holds secrets even veterans can't predict, and safety protocols are only as good as the attention paid to them. When the recall signal pulsed through the water, it should have been just another routine ending to another beautiful dive. One by one, divers surfaced, hauling themselves back onto the outer edge's deck, their tanks lighter, their memories heavier with the wonders they'd witnessed. But the sea, it seemed, had other plans that day, plans that would expose the fatal flaws in even the most experienced diving operations. Tom and Eileen's decision to dive without an instructor wasn't unusual for a couple with their experience. After all, they had explored countless reefs together, their movements underwater as synchronized as their lives above it. But sometimes, experience itself can be a trap, breeding the kind of confidence that blinds us to lurking dangers. As they slipped beneath the surface that afternoon, more than 40 miles from shore, they couldn't know they were diving into a nightmare that would rewrite diving safety protocols forever. As darkness began to creep across the Pacific, Tom and Eileen Lonergan faced a nightmare that would haunt the diving industry for years to come. Their last ascent had revealed an empty horizon. No boat, no fellow divers, just the endless ripple of waves stretching toward a distant shore they knew lay 40 miles beyond their reach. The outer edge, their lifeline to civilization, had vanished like a mirage. The initial hours might have been colored by hope. Surely someone would notice. Surely a head count would reveal their absence. Surely the boat would return. But as the sun tracked across the sky, that hope began to dim like the fading daylight. Their buoyancy compensators kept them afloat, a small mercy in an otherwise merciless situation, but floating meant becoming prey to everything that lurked beneath. These waters, beautiful as they were, harbored some of the world's most dangerous sharks. Every splash, every shadow beneath the surface, carried the potential for terror. The Lonergans' extensive diving experience, 160 dives between them, now seemed a cruel irony. All that knowledge, all that training, reduced to this: 2 bodies floating in an infinite blue desert. Their situation echoed other survival stories, like the British tourist who spent 40 hours fighting stormy Australian waters before washing up on an island just 3 miles from shore. But the Lonergans faced a far more daunting reality. No islands dotted their horizon. No shipping lanes promised rescue. Their world had shrunk to the few feet of ocean they could see around them, every wave a reminder of their isolation. As the day wore on, the beauty of the Great Barrier Reef that had so enchanted them hours before took on a more sinister aspect. The same waters that had given them their greatest adventure now threatened to become their tomb. Their buoyancy compensators, designed for diving rather than survival, provided just enough flotation to keep them above water, preventing immediate drowning but offering little comfort as exhaustion began to set in. The cruel truth was beginning to surface. Their dream destination had become a trap, and the vastness that had once inspired awe now inspired only dread. As night approached, the Lonergans faced the terrifying prospect of darkness in waters known for their nocturnal predators, with no way to signal for help and no idea if anyone had even noticed their absence. The true horror of their situation unfolded in cruel increments. While Tom and Eileen Lonergan bobbed in the merciless ocean, their fellow divers were already heading back to port, their diving bags sitting unclaimed on the outer edge's deck, silent witnesses to a catastrophic oversight. Just a mile away, salvation floated in the form of pontoons anchored to the seabed, but in the rolling waves, such distance might as well have been light years. The ocean's surface, constantly shifting, made spotting these potential lifelines nearly impossible. The Port Douglas winds, notorious for their unpredictability, likely pushed them further from these floating sanctuaries with each passing hour. The scorching tropical sun beat down relentlessly, turning the endless blue expanse into a dehydrating prison. Their diving experience, extensive as it was, offered little comfort against the primal fear of abandonment in these predator-rich waters. Back on the outer edge, a series of fatal errors compounded their fate. The crew, distracted by post-dive routines and passenger meals, failed to notice their absence. Someone's careless double counting of another couple sealed their fate. The meticulous diving documentation, depth records, air levels, safety checks, all rendered meaningless by a simple failure to count to 26 correctly. The bitter irony lay in the mundane nature of their abandonment. While they fought for survival in open water, their fellow passengers chatted about their amazing dive experiences over snacks. The very protocols designed to prevent such disasters, passenger counts, equipment checks, dive logs, had been casually disregarded or incorrectly performed. As sunset approached, with less than 5 hours of daylight remaining, the Lonergans faced the terrifying prospect of their first night alone in these waters. While tourists back in Port Douglas settled into their evening routines, 2 empty diving bags lay forgotten on a boat dock, the only evidence of a couple whose dream vacation had transformed into a nightmare that would revolutionize diving safety protocols worldwide. Their disappearance would go unnoticed for far too long. The casual negligence of that afternoon rippling outward into consequences no one aboard the outer edge could have imagined. In the gathering darkness, Tom and Eileen faced the first of what would become an odyssey of survival, or perhaps something far more tragic. The negligence unfolded like a slow-motion tragedy. While Tom and Eileen fought for survival somewhere in the vast Pacific, their abandoned diving bags stood sentinel on the outer edge's deck for 2 more days, silent accusers of a system that had catastrophically failed them. Even when new divers discovered their discarded weight belts on the ocean floor, a clear sign of desperate survival tactics, the crew merely saw it as a fortuitous find of free equipment. The sheer magnitude of this oversight is breathtaking. For 2 more days, the outer edge continued its routine operations, ferrying fresh groups of excited tourists to the same waters where 2 lives hung in the balance. New divers marveled at the reef's beauty in the very spot where, perhaps just yards away, 2 abandoned souls drifted between hope and despair. It took 50 hours, 50 crucial, life-altering hours before anyone raised an alarm. The discovery came almost accidentally when the boat's skipper finally investigated the unclaimed bags on Tuesday evening. Inside, he found Tom's wallet and the shirt he'd worn that fateful Sunday, physical remnants of lives potentially already lost to the sea's indifference. The horror of recognition must have hit like a physical blow. These weren't just forgotten tourist belongings, they were evidence of a catastrophic failure in the system. Only then, as police rushed to find an empty hotel room, did the full weight of the situation begin to sink in. 2 people had vanished into the ocean's vastness, and for 2 days, life had continued as normal. Tours had proceeded, and their disappearance had gone completely unnoticed. The most chilling aspect wasn't just the initial oversight, it was the cascade of missed opportunities that followed. Each overlooked bag, each ignored weight belt, each uncounted head represented another chance to save lives, squandered by routine and complacency. While tourists snapped photos and marveled at the reef's beauty, somewhere in those same waters, Tom and Eileen's fate was being sealed by this deadly chain of negligence. The response of Port Douglas to the Lonergans' disappearance transformed from negligence to urgency in a heartbeat. The sleepy tourist town mobilized every available resource. Police numbers tripled, Coast Guard vessels deployed, and private boat owners joined a desperate search effort. But time, that critical factor in any rescue operation, had already slipped away. 48 precious hours had vanished before anyone even knew to look. The search itself became a race against probability. 17 aircraft crisscrossed the skies while boats combed the surface below, all searching an impossibly vast area of 3 million square miles. The ocean's currents could have carried the couple anywhere within this liquid desert, making each passing hour more critical than the last. Then came the first haunting clue. Tom's buoyancy compensator washed up on Crocodile Beach, 70 miles north of their last known location. The vest, unmarked by predators, offered a glimmer of hope that quickly faded as more items surfaced. A single fin, a wetsuit hood, and finally, most ominously, fragments of torn wetsuit material. Each piece told part of a story, but not the part anyone wanted to hear. The cruel irony hung heavy over the rescue teams. While they searched vast expanses of ocean, the evidence washing ashore suggested they were already too late. The Outer Edge management's prayers for a miracle discovery grew increasingly desperate as the reality of their negligence and its consequences became impossible to ignore. The items washing up along the coastline read like breadcrumbs leading to a truth no one wanted to face. With each discovery, the search shifted from a rescue mission to something far grimmer. The ocean, having claimed its victims, was now slowly returning their possessions to shore, piece by piece, like a killer's calling cards. The evidence washed ashore told a story more tragic than any thriller could devise. Each item, the torn wetsuit encrusted with shells, the intact oxygen tanks, the diving plates bearing their names, painted a picture of a slow descent into desperation. The forensics revealed the wetsuit had been in the water since January 26th, suggesting Eileen had removed it during their second day adrift. The phenomenon of paradoxical undressing, typically associated with hypothermia victims, took on a cruel twist in the tropical waters. While the 29-degree sea temperature ruled out cold as their enemy, dehydration and the scorching Queensland sun likely drove them to similar irrational actions. In their delirium, they may have stripped away the very equipment keeping them alive. Most telling was the absence of shark attacks on any recovered items. The ocean had claimed them not through violence, but through a slower, more insidious form of torture: exposure, dehydration, and exhaustion. The buoyancy of their diving suits could have prolonged their survival, but in their deteriorating mental state, they'd removed this final lifeline. By February 14, 1998, when the police finally suspended their search, the evidence pointed to a stark conclusion. Tom and Eileen Lonergan had succumbed to the elements within days of their abandonment. Their final moments remained forever lost to the vast Pacific. But the scattered belongings washing ashore over those weeks told a story of gradual surrender to the sea's implacable force. The intact oxygen tanks, still containing traces of air, stood as a final, cruel irony, a reminder of how close help might have been. If only someone had counted correctly, if only someone had noticed sooner, if only someone had questioned the abandoned bags or the weights found on the seafloor. Each piece of equipment that drifted ashore became not just evidence, but an indictment of the cascade of errors that had led to this tragedy. The discovery of their slate, found by fishermen 90 miles from their disappearance site, provided the last known words of Tom and Eileen Lonergan. The desperate message, dated 8:00 a.m. on January 26th, read like a final whisper from the abyss. To anyone who can help us, we were left on the reef on January 25th, 1998 at 3:00 p.m. Save us before we die. Their plea for help, scrawled on a diver's communication board, would drift uselessly in the currents for 6 months before being discovered. The evidence pieced together suggests a grim end. Dehydration and exhaustion likely claimed them within days, their bodies eventually succumbing to the ocean's recycling process. Marine life and scavenging birds would have completed nature's cycle within 2 weeks, leaving only bones to scatter across the reef floor or sink into the silt below. Some cling to theories of shark attacks, drawn to the more dramatic explanation. But the recovered equipment, unmarked by predator damage, tells a different story, one of slow surrender to the elements rather than violent end. The ocean preserved their belongings but claimed their bodies, leaving their families with questions that would never be answered. The mystery of their final hours remains locked in the depths of the Great Barrier Reef. Did they maintain hope until the end? Did they comfort each other as their strength ebbed away? Their story echoes in every safety protocol now strictly enforced in diving operations worldwide, a legacy written in the wake of their disappearance. Tom and Eileen's tragic end transformed what should have been another adventure in their love story into a cautionary tale. Young, in love, with grand plans, and their whole lives ahead, all erased by a simple failure to count to 26 correctly. Their disappearance would force the diving industry to confront its casual approach to safety, but for 2 souls lost to the vast Pacific, these changes came too late. The staged disappearance theory falls apart under scrutiny. Tom and Eileen had no motive to orchestrate such an elaborate deception. They were planning to return home after 2 years abroad, had just completed their bucket list dream of diving the Great Barrier Reef, and maintained strong family connections. The reported sightings after their disappearance proved false, and their bank accounts remained untouched. The Stingray connection, while dramatic, offers little insight. Steve Irwin's tragic 2006 death near Port Douglas occurred in shallow water under very different circumstances. The Lonergans' recovered equipment showed no signs of marine life attacks, neither from stingrays nor the largely harmless reef sharks that populate the area. The evidence consistently points to a simpler, though no less tragic, explanation: gradual succumbing to the elements. Their discovered slate, dated January 26th at 8:00 a.m., confirms they were alive and lucid enough to write the morning after their abandonment. But exposure, dehydration, and exhaustion in the tropical waters would have quickly taken their toll. The scattered sightings and conspiracy theories that followed serve only to obscure the stark reality. A series of basic safety failures led to 2 experienced divers being left at sea. Their story prompted crucial reforms in diving safety protocols, though this offered little consolation to their families. The ocean kept its final secrets, leaving only scattered equipment and a desperate message on a slate as testament to their final hours. The discovery of Tom and Eileen's diary entries added another layer to their tragic disappearance. Tom's writing, 6 months before their final dive, revealed a man who felt he'd peaked at 33, believing everything would only decline from there. Eileen's entries showed her concern for his state of mind, yet her dedication to remain with him until the end. However, their families insisted these writings were taken out of context. Police confirmed that media outlets cherry-picked passages to support a suicide narrative, ignoring entries that showed their zest for life. The discovered dive slate, with its desperate plea for help, contradicts any suggestion of a death wish. To anyone who can help us, save us before we die. The captain's strange account of his passenger count increasing by 2 the next day adds another mysterious element, though this lead, like many others, led nowhere. Their bank accounts remained untouched, their passports abandoned, and their insurance policies unclaimed, all evidence pointing away from an elaborate disappearance scheme. The simplest explanation remains the most likely. The Lonergans died from exposure, dehydration, and exhaustion after being abandoned at sea. Their personal writings, while revealing moments of existential reflection common to many, don't suggest a suicide pact. Rather, they document the thoughts of a couple who, despite occasional dark musings, still had plans for their future, plans tragically cut short by a simple failure to count passengers correctly. Their final message on the dive slate stands as the most reliable testament to their fate. Not a carefully orchestrated disappearance or a suicide pact, but a desperate cry for help from 2 people who very much wanted to live. The story's conclusion paints a somber legacy. The Outer Edge's captain was acquitted in '99, though his company faced crippling fines and eventual bankruptcy. The couple's diary entries, used in court to suggest suicide, couldn't overshadow their final desperate plea for help scrawled on the dive slate. Their disappearance transformed Australia's diving industry. Stricter safety protocols emerged, though these changes came too late for Tom and Eileen. The 2003 film Open Water dramatized their ordeal, bringing their story to a global audience and further cementing diving safety reforms. 25 years later, the most likely explanation remains the simplest. They succumbed to exposure and exhaustion, their bodies claimed by the vast Pacific. The recovered equipment, the desperate message, and the absence of predator marks all support this conclusion. The various theories, from staged disappearance to suicide pact, fall apart under scrutiny. Their untouched bank accounts, abandoned passports, and final plea for help paint a clear picture of a tragic accident rather than an elaborate scheme. The Lonergans' legacy lives on in every head count, every safety check, and every diving protocol now strictly enforced along the Great Barrier Reef. Their story serves as a haunting reminder that in diving, as in life, the smallest oversight can have devastating consequences.